Ever get that feeling like you're standing somewhere and something huge happened like eons ago? I was hiking by Lake Superior once, and I totally had that moment. Is by this incredible rock formation, this Gunflint chert. It's known for having some of the oldest fossils of like early life on Earth. And I just remember thinking, wow, this rock has seen it all. So you're curious about the history of life on Earth, right? Well, today's deep dive takes us on this like 3 billion year journey, from single celled organisms to Wellus. We're going to be using a stack of research articles and even some notes you jotted down to really unpack this massive topic. Think about it. Earth was a completely different place back then. No plants, no animals. You couldn't even breathe the air. It was wild. We're talking volcanic landscapes, like something out of a sci-fi movie, right? Hot springs bubbling with barium sulfate, an atmosphere choked with methane and carbon dioxide, like an alien planet. But here's the thing, even in this like seemingly hostile environment, life found a way. And we know this because scientists are like detectives, piecing together this ancient story using rocks, fossils, and even molecules as clues. One of their most important tools is geological dating. They use radioactive isotopes, these elements that decay at a specific rate, like a ticking clock. And there are these tiny crystals called zircons that are like time capsules, trapping these isotopes within their structure. By measuring the ratio of parent isotopes to daughter isotopes, scientists can figure out the age of these rocks with incredible accuracy. And what these rocks tell us is that the first chapter of life on Earth was dominated by microbes. For billions of years, bacteria and archaea ruled the planet, thriving in environments that would be toxic to us. They were the unsung heroes of early life, shaping the planet as we know it. Take, for example, their metabolisms. These early microbes were incredibly diverse and resourceful, with the ability to extract energy from all sorts of sources. They sustained the carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur cycles, recycling elements and making them available for other life forms. Before photosynthesis even evolved, these early ecosystems were powered by chemosynthesis. Instead of using sunlight, these microbes were getting energy from chemical reactions, like oxidizing iron or sulfur. Talk about resourceful. Now, figuring out what these early microbes actually looked like is a whole other challenge. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the haystack is billions of years old and the needle is microscopic. I remember once examining some Warrawona chert with this paleontologist, Martin Brazier, in London. This chert, is a type of sedimentary rock that's known for preserving really ancient fossils. And let me tell you, identifying fossilized microbes is not exactly a walk in the park. The problem is these things are tiny, and the rocks themselves have been through a lot over billions of years, right? So it's this constant debate about whether certain structures are actually fossilized microbes or just, weird mineral formations. The context is everything. But even if we can't always be 100% sure, the mere possibility that those tiny structures might be the remains of some of the earliest life on Earth, well, that's pretty mind-blowing, don't you think? And raises some really interesting questions. What were these early microbes like?
How did they interact with their environment? And how did they eventually give rise to the more complex life forms we see today? These are the questions that drive scientists to keep digging deeper, to keep searching for those elusive clues that can help us understand the origins of life on Earth. Okay, so we've established that early Earth was a microbial world. But how did we go from an oxygen-poor environment to one where we can breathe? That's where the story gets really interesting, and that's what we'll be diving into next. So we've got this ancient Earth, right? A world ruled by microbes and no oxygen to speak of. How did we get from that to Wellus? That's the $1 million question, or maybe the billion-year question. Well, the answer, at least part of it, lies with these remarkable little creatures called cyanobacteria. They were like the original photosynthesizers, the pioneers that figured out how to harness sunlight to make energy, and as a byproduct, release oxygen. Talk about a game changer. And one of the best places to see this revolution in action is in, you guessed it, the Gunflint chert. Remember that incredible rock formation I mentioned earlier? The one that got me thinking about deep time. Well, the Gunflint chert is about 1.9 billion years old, and it paints this vivid picture
of this transition from an oxygen-poor world to one where oxygen started to become, well, a thing. It shows these layers of iron-rich sediments, evidence of a time when the oceans were saturated with dissolved iron. But then something remarkable happens. As you move up to the layers of the gunflint chert, those iron formations start to disappear. What does that tell us? Well, it means the oxygen produced by those early cyanobacteria was starting to react with the iron-forming iron oxides, essentially rusting the oceans. And as the iron got used up, oxygen started to build up in the atmosphere. It was a slow process, mind you, taking millions of years, but it had this profound impact on the course of life on Earth. But here's the thing. How do we know for sure that cyanobacteria were the culprits behind this oxygen revolution? And we're talking about events that happened billions of years ago, right? Well, this is where those molecular detectives I mentioned earlier come in. Scientists have discovered these molecules called 2-methylhopanes, and they're like fossilized fingerprints. These molecules are so specific to cyanobacteria that finding them is like finding, well, a fossilized fingerprint. Direct proof that they were there churning out oxygen and changing the world. Now, the rise of oxygen wasn't just about, making the air breathable for us billions of years down the line. It also had this profound impact on the evolution of life itself. Because you see, oxygen's a powerful oxidant, and it can be pretty toxic to cells that aren't used to it. So this oxygen revolution created this huge selective pressure, kind of like a cosmic game of survival of the fittest. And the winners of this game were the organisms that figured out how to not only tolerate oxygen, but actually use it to their advantage. And those organisms were, drumroll please, eukaryotes. You and me were eukaryotes. We're part of this lineage that evolved the ability to not only survive in an oxidative world, but actually thrive in it. But what makes eukaryotes so special, so different from those early bacteria and archaea? Well, for one thing, they're more complex. They have a nucleus, a membrane-bound compartment that houses their DNA, kind of like a control center for the cell. They also have all these other organelles like mitochondria and chloroplasts that perform specialized functions. Eukaryotic cells are like those fancy Swiss Army knives. They've got all these different tools for different jobs, while bacteria and archaea are more like your basic pocket knife. Still useful, but not quite as versatile. So where did these complex eukaryotes come from? That's where things get really mind-blowing, because the prevailing theory is that they evolved through this process called endosymbiosis. It's like something out of a science fiction novel. Imagine one cell engulfing another cell, but instead of digesting it, they decide to team up to form a partnership. And over millions of years, that partnership becomes so tight, so intertwined that they become a single organism. That's essentially what scientists think happened with mitochondria and chloroplasts. These organelles, which are essential for energy production in eukaryotic cells, were once free-living bacteria that got swallowed up by another cell.
And get this, these organelles still retain some of their own DNA, a kind of molecular echo of their free-living past. It's like nature's ultimate collaboration, It's this mind-blowing fusion of different life forms that resulted in, us.
Yeah.
I remember reading about this for the first time and just being completely blown away. It changes your whole perspective on life. It makes you realize that everything is connected. We're all part of this grand evolutionary tapestry. And speaking of evidence, we have actual fossils that support this endosymbiotic theory. There are these amazing fossils from China, from the Dushantou and Guizhou formations. They're about 600 million years old. They show some of the earliest evidence of eukaryotic cells, including red algae and these really cool things called cell fountain structures. It's like watching evolution in action. Of course, there's always debate in science, right? And the exact timing of eukaryotic diversification is still, being hashed out. The fossil record for microscopic organisms is notoriously tricky to interpret, and environmental factors like nutrient availability could have also played a role. But the overall picture is pretty clear. Eukaryotes emerged from this ancient microbial world, and they brought with them a whole new level of complexity and diversity. And that set the stage for the next big chapter in life's story of the Cambrian explosion. But before we get to that, let's take a little detour, because there's another fascinating chapter in Earth's history
that might have played a crucial role in shaping the evolution of life. It's a story of ice, of global freeze, of a planet pushed to its limits. It's a story of snowball Earth. Okay, so picture this. The entire planet Earth, encased in ice, we're talking poles to the equator, the whole shebang. Could anything survive that? Well, that's the question scientists have been grappling with for years, ever since they started finding evidence for these like massive global ice ages during the late Proterozoic, like 700 million years ago. And the evidence is pretty compelling. We're talking glacial deposits found in places that are like tropical today. And then there are these carbon isotope signatures in rocks that suggest super low levels of biological activity, like, photosynthesis, just ground to a halt. It's like the planet went into this deep freeze rate. And it's given rise to this pretty wild hypothesis called, you guessed it, snowball Earth. Now, how could Earth have possibly become a giant snowball? Well, there's this thing called runaway ice albedo feedback. Imagine a mirror, right? The bigger the mirror, the more sunlight it reflects. Well, ice is kind of like a giant mirror. As it spreads, it reflects more and more sunlight back into space, which cools the planet even further, causing more ice to form. It's like this vicious cycle, And there are other factors that could have contributed to this global freeze, like maybe a massive volcanic eruption spewing ash into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun, or maybe changes in Earth's orbit or the tilt of its axis, messing with the amount of sunlight reaching the surface. But here's where things get really interesting. Some scientists believe that this snowball Earth event might have actually been like a crucial turning point in the history of life. Think about it, a global freeze would have been like a massive extinction event, right? Wiping out a lot of existing life. But it also would have created all these new opportunities, these empty ecological niches just waiting to be filled. And when the ice eventually melted, it's like the reset button got hit on evolution. And that's where the Cambrian explosion comes in. So we're talking about 540 million years ago, right? And all of a sudden, bam, the oceans just explode with all these crazy new animal body plans, trilobites, brachiopods, and these bizarre creatures like Opubenia with its 5 eyes, and a grasping proboscis, or Anomalocaris is a giant predator with these like spiky appendages. Like, nature went on this creative spree, and we know all this because of these amazing fossils from the Burgess Shale in Canada. It's like this snapshot of this incredible moment in evolutionary history. Now, to really understand the Cambrian explosion, we need to talk about crown groups and stem groups. A crown group is like all the living members of a particular group, like all the mammals alive today. A stem group is like the extinct ancestors that led to that crown group, those evolutionary branches that didn't quite make it to the present day. And what's fascinating is that the Burgess Shale shows us this mix of both crown group and stem group animals. Like, they're all hanging out together in these ancient oceans. It's like this glimpse into this crucial transition period when animal life was really diversifying and experimenting with all sorts of new body plans. What triggered this explosion of life? Well, there are a few ideas, right? One is that developmental genes, the genes that control, how an embryo develops, were undergoing some major changes. Maybe there were mutations that allowed for greater flexibility in body plans. Another idea is that the environmental conditions were just right, like maybe the oxygen levels had finally reached a point where complex active animals could thrive. And then there's this idea of an ecological arms race, predator-prey relationships driving evolution. As predators evolved, new ways to hunt prey had evolved new ways to defend themselves, and so on, leading to this rapid diversification of life. It's probably a combination of all these factors, like this perfect storm of genetic innovation, environmental change, and ecological pressure that just like kicked evolution into overdrive. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From those single-celled pioneers to the oxygen revolution, the mind-boggling snowball Earth, and then that burst of life in the Cambrian explosion. It's humbling and exhilarating to realize that we're part of this grand story, a story that's still unfolding. So what's next? Who knows? But one thing's for sure, the history of life on Earth is a testament to the power of resilience, adaptation, and, well, a little bit of luck. And as we continue to explore and learn, we might just find that the most amazing chapters are yet to be written. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and until next time, keep those questions coming. Keep that curiosity burning bright. Who knows, maybe one of you listening will be the one to make the next groundbreaking discovery in unraveling the mysteries of life on Earth. If you'll excuse me, I think I'm going to go find a nice spot to just sit and contemplate all this for a while. Maybe with a cup of coffee in hand. All this talk about billions of years has made me feel like I need a little caffeine boost.